Hi everyone, welcome back to the garden, and today I've got one that a lot of people have requested, and that is how far away my fruit trees are from each other. So if you've wondered how close together my fruit trees are and you want to put a lot more fruit trees into your garden, then this video is going to be perfect for you. So I thought today we'd take a tape measure, we're going to go take a look around the garden, see how far away my fruit trees are, and I'm going to also talk about the three main criteria when deciding how far apart or how close to part each fruit tree. These are super important, so you're going to want to get a pen and paper and write them down so you can fill it out for your own garden, because spacing and choosing where to plant things is going to be super personal for you, your climate and your goals from the garden. So I'm going to talk about some of my goals about growing high density here in my gardens, but I want this to be helpful for you, so let's go and take a look. So the first one is, what is your goal? My goal is to create variety. I want to grow as many different fruits as I can and expand my fruiting calendar to be able to come outside and pick fruit 365 days a year. And with the limited space that I do have, if I was to abide by correct spacing rules, I would probably only have about 20 fruit trees, and that is not going to cut it for my passion, my goals, my big dreams. So we've had to change things up. But yours might be completely different. You may want to have 5 fruit trees that produce huge abundance. They're your favourite fruits, they're what you want to eat, and you want to try and maximise the amount that you can get from them. That's going to take you down a completely different path. So number 2 is climate. What is your climate like? What are your growing conditions like? Because that's also going to help determine how far apart your trees should be placed. If you are in a hot, dry climate like me, then your main concerns are going to be shade and shelter and protection and trying to reduce the amount of moisture loss. If you are in a climate where it is very wet and very humid, then you might want more focus on spacing to provide airflow, stop bacteria and mildew and mold, and any of those sort of diseases that come with damp, wet weather in your garden. So writing down some key factors about your climate and what sort of growing conditions you are in is going to also help you determine how far apart to put your trees. And the third one is the types of trees that you're thinking about planting. Planting something like a dwarf lime tree, a deciduous apium tree, or an avocado or mango tree are completely different types of trees. Something like a dwarf lime is going to have a very different growth rate and size to something like an avocado or a mango. So writing down those types of trees that you want to grow, then we can start filling in the gaps with some of the smaller trees, or trees like these deciduous trees that lose their leaves in winter and let light in. We also have trees like my feijoa and my guava in between that don't mind a really good haircut each year, so we can keep them compact and fruiting, because they also fruit on a lot of the new growth. So cutting them back each year is only going to give me more mulch for the garden to feed my fruit trees, and also I'm still going to get a whole lot of fruit. So let's go take a look through the garden and see how far apart my fruit trees are and why I've decided to plant that way. Alright, so let's start off with this front fruit tree line. This is one of the first gardens that I established here, and the spacing is actually quite particular because my partner measured out the initial fruit trees because he loves straight lines and he wanted them to be evenly spaced. I did try and tell him that they're going to all grow differently, and he also didn't know that I was going to be completely taking over the front yard, but that's another story. So the original trees that were in here were the citrus. So we have 4 citrus along a line of 10 metres, and they were evenly spaced at, so my measuring skills are absolutely diabolical, but I'm not a measurer. All right, so roughly 8 feet or 2.5 metres between these original citrus trees, and that is most likely the same all the way down. Now these are dwarf and semi-dwarf trees, which I chose to try and keep the size small, keep them manageable, reduce the amount of pruning that I had to do, and also be able to fit more trees in. So this is over 5 years ago, 6 years ago at this point, and the trees are pretty compact still. I don't prune them a lot, I just tip prune them to make them bushier. This orange tree has really taken off this spring, so it has jumped up a huge amount in size. But I would have all of this space free for like 6 years growing nothing if I hadn't planted in between. So then what I did is I went through and I popped in another tree in between the 2 trees. So we have the lime tree, and then I popped in a feijoa tree, And then we've got the blood orange tree. Now the vigorous trees don't mind a good haircut. I can cut this thing back as much as I want and it's still going to keep producing fruit. So having something like that in between my main trees gives me the flexibility of using the space, but this does mean that I'm going to have to keep it regularly pruned. So being in the garden and pruning trees is something that I don't mind doing. I love doing it. I love being able to produce mulch to then feed the trees as well. This orange tree at this size produces more than enough fruit for me. I don't need to get baskets and baskets of oranges. I'm so happy with getting, 10 oranges, 10 limes, 10 of everything. And of course that is increasing every year. I get a lot more than 10 oranges off this tree now, but this size right here is perfect and I can prune this back if I need to for these other trees here. I then went in with edible ground covers and middle layers to provide moisture protection and also to provide chop and drop. So I cut these back all the time, feed them back to the trees. So I'm utilizing this space here while it's not being used, and then I'm cutting it back, feeding it to the trees to then grow these to produce more fruit. Everything in my garden is not also logical. So there are some things that are just wild cards, like this mango that I've put in here. Obviously, a mango tree gets very big, and if you had the space, you'd be wanting to give it a lot more room. They also want good airflow. I ran out of space and I really wanted to get these mangoes in the ground. So I've popped this mango in here and I will be pruning it back and just trying to keep it nice and compact. One day, if I do have to give it more space, then the vigorous could either be transplanted, grafted onto one of my other trees or moved, and then this mango could then take up a bit more of this space. But my plan at the moment is to just keep these really compact and really small, even if that means I only get 5 to 10 mangoes off this tree. I'm completely happy with that because I have other mangoes in other areas as well. So down in here we have a little bit of a custard apple grove, and custard apples really like the protection. They're wanting to have some more dappled sunlight, some more shade here in Perth. So having them kind of all close together like this is giving them a lot more shade and protection from the wind, from the hot sun. So these ones here we have, that is 1.2 meters apart, or around 4 foot. And that's the same over here with this peach tree, about 4 foot or 1.2 meters apart. Now this peach tree loses its leaves in winter, so it's letting the light in. These are all deciduous really, so they're all asleep in winter. And then in summer this has leaves, which is going to add a little bit more protection. It's going to add a wind buffer to these two custard apples. So that's where it's important to figure out what types of fruit trees you're looking at. If I was to plant 3 mangoes 4 foot apart, that is far too close because those 4 mangoes are going to get really big. They love the sunlight. They're going to be competing for light, competing for space. Whereas things like these custard apples and this peach that are only awake for the summer season and would love some protection from each other, then it works out much better. These can also be pruned to keep small. The peach tree is a semi-dwarf, so it is going to grow a lot slower. It's not going to get sort of large and in charge really fast. And then behind that, so behind the peach tree, we have a guava. Now my guava is a little bit closer. So the guava is around 80 to 90 centimeters, so it's just under 3 foot from the guava to the peach. Now the guava is another one that can be completely hacked back. It loves a good haircut. It produces fruit on the new growth, so I can cut this right back, still get fruit every year. And the more I cut it, the bushier it gets and the more fruit it gets lower down. As long as I'm prepared to keep pruning this. And I got so much fruit off this. Like a tree this size produced 30 to 40 fruits, and they're big fruit, which is way more than I need. So, a guava tree this size, completely enough fruit for me. Next to it, however, we do have a troublemaker. So this is a loquat, and I did plant that from a seed, so it is my fault. But a loquat is going to get huge. So a loquat is going to get to be a very big tree, and it's also really hardy and really vigorous. So it's going to grow really fast, even in harsh climate like I have here. So a lot of these other plants here are more going to struggle than thrive because of the harsh, hot, dry conditions, the lack of rain we have here. So that comes down to my climate as well. I'm not so worried about having a lot of trees close together because they are going to grow a lot slower because of my climate, because of the lack of rain, and because also I don't really use synthetic fertilizers, so I'm not pushing them to grow. I do a lot of composting, worm farms, chop and drop, mulching. So a lot of that is going to produce a lot slower growing fruit trees because I'm not forcing them with some instant gratification. However, something like a loquat or a mulberry, they thrive in a lot of different conditions. So they are going to be really hard to try and keep small. So that's another one that comes into the what type of fruit tree it is. All right, so down here we have my avocado tree. So this is my Linda avocado. Now, avocados are one of the trees that are going to take up a lot more space. They're going to need a lot more airflow and a lot more room in the garden. Obviously, things that I just don't have the spare space. If I had the spare space, I would be giving this avocado more like 12 foot between everything, but I don't. So I could either give it less room or not have it. And I really wanted it. So that's another decision-making process that I go through, is like either I could keep it in a pot, which I don't like growing in pots. It's too hot and dry here, and I like to go away a lot. So that also is another factor, my lifestyle. So having things in the ground is a lot safer for me. So I could either have it in a pot, which I don't want, I could give it less space than ideal, or I could not have it. So obviously I went with less space than ideal. So the other thing is I have this tree and a lot of my fruit trees on the southern side of my annual veggie patch. So the sun is going to come across here. So these trees along here are not going to shade out any part of my veggie patch. Now I have this tree, let me see, probably only 3 foot. Yeah, pretty much 3 foot, which is 80 centimetres, so just under a metre away from the raised garden beds. Obviously not ideal. Would love to have it way further away, but I just don't have the space. So a few things that I have done to help with that is that I have kept this pruned really low. So it starts branching out 1 foot from the ground. So I'm starting to get flowers and all these branches here at a really low height. So my plan is to keep these trees nice and compact. I want to be able to reach the fruit. I don't want to be having to get ladders out for all of my fruit trees to be able to net the fruit, bag the fruit, or pick the fruit. So keeping my fruit trees where I can reach the fruit is also going to allow me to have more space. So this tree I envision getting, to maybe 2 meters, 2.5 meters max in height, and the tree behind it that could end up getting overshadowed is my mandarin tree. So I bought that mandarin tree as part of my original 4 fruit trees in this 10-meter strip. I paid $25 for it over 5-6 years ago, and I don't love the fruit. So I specifically put this avocado tree here so that in the future, if I do end up removing the mandarin tree, then this avocado could then take up some of that space there. And I've done that with a lot of my fruit trees. I have purchased most of them for the cheapest price, the smallest tree, $25, $30 for a really small young plant. Obviously saved in money. It's also meant that I can prune them from a young age, and if later on down the track I decide I don't love them or I want to move them, I don't feel that anxiety or that stress because I didn't spend a whole lot of money on that tree. I've got my money's worth out of that tree already, and if I could move it or if I could transplant it, graft it, put it somewhere else, then awesome. But if it ends up as mulch, $25 over 5 or 6 years isn't a huge problem. If, for example, you were paying $150 for a tree or more for a more mature tree and you're wanting to put it in a spot and you want to leave it there because, obviously you don't want to lose the tree, the money, all of that has gone into that tree, then it's going to be a very different scenario. And sometimes fruit trees are just too hard to keep small. Like this cutting grown mulberry I removed from the backyard. I got fruit off this. It created shade, mulch for over 5 years, and then it was just time to replace it with something else. I'm not worried about my gardens being right from the start, the perfect layout, the perfect spacing. So my garden's always changing. There's always something new, something being removed, something being added. All right, so next to my avocado tree, we have behind it, we have the mandarin tree, which potentially one day might come out. We also have a feijoa tree. So the feijoa tree is 1.4 meters or 4.5 foot. So like I said with the other feijoa, we can prune this back, we can manipulate it, use it for shade, for wind protection, for fruit. You can see it's starting to produce flowers. So all of these branches are going to be loaded in flowers at 1 foot off the ground, and they produce a whole lot of fruit on a small tree. So keeping this small, I'm still going to get a lot of fruit out of it, and I also have 4 trees. Therefore, I'm going to get plenty of feijoas. And then next to it here, which is probably the same distance again, is a papaya that I planted from seed and transplanted. So I moved this from another area of the garden. It might not survive, who knows, but it cost me nothing. I've got a bunch of them that I've planted from seed. So that's another good one to fill in the gaps in between, is by planting things from seed or from cuttings. So you can utilize the space while you have it, but then if later on down the track this avocado is taking up the space, I'm not going to be devastated that my seed grown papaya has to be removed. Other side of this avocado tree is where we have the peach. And I'd say this is about 1 metre. I don't know, there's more. 1.3 metres between this avocado and this peach tree. And again, this peach tree loses its leaves, so it lets the light in winter for this avocado tree, and in summer it's got some leaves, and this avocado tree would love some wind protection and some sun protection from any hot afternoon sun. So having deciduous fruit trees in between evergreen fruit trees is another way that you can fill in the gaps and plant more fruit trees, because they are taking up different amounts of light and letting light in during the winter time, when this avocado tree would love more light. Now, my biggest fruit trees in this garden are going to be my avocados and my mangoes. So how far away are they from each other? Let's have a look. So we've got my Linda avocado over here. So between my mango here and my Linda avocado, we have 12.5 feet or 3.8 meters. So that's a decent amount of space. And those are the trees that I want to give the maximum amount of space that I can. So I have another mango down the other end, and then I have another avocado on that end that are a little bit closer together. But I've tried to space those out as much as I can, because avocados and mangoes are my dream crop. So if I had to reduce the amount of trees here in the garden, then I would be wanting to have avocados and mangoes. Things like these custard apples and my stone fruit. Much more easily transplant stone fruit. I can also graft this onto other stone fruits I have throughout the garden, because grafting is another way that you can add more varieties onto one tree. So say we get another 5 years down the track, 10 years down the track, and I'm struggling to keep my avocado and my mangoes smaller. My backup plan is that things like these custard apples, during winter, I could transplant them, or I could graft them onto some of the seed ones I've grown, or onto other trees in other parts of the garden. So that is one of the reasons that I have my bigger long-term crops as far away as possible from each other. And those are things that aren't going to want to be transplanted. Avocados are really hard to transplant. They don't want to be moved. So you really want to find a home in the garden that is going to be a long-term home. So coming up with some of those backup plans of what you could do if this avocado needs more space is a really good idea. So in terms of number 3, in which fruit tree we're talking about, a lot of our deciduous trees like our apples, our nectarines and our peaches, they like to have multiple trees for cross-pollination. So you are going to want to have 2 different varieties to help with that. But you can also plant them in the same hole. So that takes up a lot less space as well. So when you're planting them in the same hole, you want to plant them at least, 1 foot apart and have them facing outward. So you want the grafts to be facing outward so the trees grow out like that. And then you're just going to have to prune the middle section to keep that nice and clear so the branches aren't rubbing on each other. But you can plant 2 trees in 1 hole. So those people that are worried about space, you can get really creative with it. It's all about taking calculated risks. And if you are experimenting, then going with, the smaller fruit trees, the less costly fruit trees, is going to allow you to feel more comfortable in experimenting. Putting in a few $100s worth of trees and packing them in too tightly and not knowing how to prune them could end up in a less desirable outcome. So that's another reason that I like to choose smaller fruit trees, younger fruit trees. Also as well, younger fruit trees haven't been sitting around in a nursery getting root bound. So I also always opt for younger plants compared to a more established expensive plant for those reasons. So you may get fruit quicker on a bigger, more mature plant, but it's going to cost you a lot more money. It's probably been in the same pot for far too long. The roots will be wrapped around, and long term you're probably going to end up with less desirable results than if you were to plant a young fruit tree and go down the patience route. So then we have my short-term crops that I can interplace in between other fruit trees, so I can start getting fruit quickly, also taking up that space while I wait for my main fruit trees to grow. So here we have a mango, and so that's going to take quite a few years to get nice and big. So in between I've planted a banana. Now this banana will eventually give me fruit. It is also going to send off side pups that I could move to other areas of the garden, and then if this mango starts to get too big, I could chop this whole banana out and give it the space here. Now a lot of people are worried about planting fruit trees too close together and them stealing nutrients from each other. So that is also something to consider, is that I'm constantly inputting more mulch, more chop and drop to feed my trees. It's not a set and forget type of thing. It also means that my fruit trees are going to grow a lot slower. So that 10-metre fruit tree line I have along the front there, that has grown probably a lot slower than if I was to have the trees spaced further apart and supplement their nutrition a lot more. But again, that's coming back to my personal preference. I want to grow things in a certain way. I don't want to be inputting a lot of synthetic fertilizers into my garden, so I'm going more of a natural route by growing my mulch, by feeding my trees with compost and worm castings rather than forcing the growth. So again, that's something that is more personal to you and how you want to garden. And things like bananas and papayas, you can quite easily get them and start growing all of these things in between and experimenting with high density without the added stress of cost. Now I've also found growing in harsh conditions like here in Perth where it's hot and dry, having things really densely populated and planted close together doesn't just steal nutrients from each other. They're all using up different types of nutrients from different levels, and they're also providing mulch. So I chop them back, feed them back into the soil. Like this is all going to get cut back and laid down to feed the trees in here. It's also helping to reduce the moisture loss because the ground is covered, and over time with me pruning and cutting back these things, I'm going to be adding more and more layers and more fiber into the ground. So this is going to get a lot more drought tolerant. It's going to feed the trees for a lot longer. So my goal really is to pack it full of as much different types of plants as possible to take up that space to then be able to chop it back and drop it back into the gardens, and going with a whole different type of diversity. So here I've got a native plant, behind that we've got the avocado, we've got the Queensland arrowroot, and we've also got things like pomegranate, which are deciduous. So this is going to lose its leaves in winter, let the light in. Over here we've got another pomegranate which is deciduous, let the light in. We've got things that like more shelter in here, my tropicals like my starfruit and my soursop. We've also got the apium, which is going to drop its leaves and let light in. So planting quite diversely with different plants like that is also helping me to get more in a smaller space and provide more green material and mulch for my gardens to therefore feed my fruit trees. So my goal is to be able to come out to my gardens and harvest fruit 365 days a year and be able to try all these different exotic fruits that I can't buy at the shop or that I've always dreamt of growing, like, growing up in New Zealand, I never thought about growing mangoes and star fruit and all of these things, which you can actually do. And it's one of my biggest passions and things that lights me up is all the different types of fruit that you can grow, trying new fruit trees, and just being able to come out and wander through the garden. So I'm constantly in my garden. It is not only my biggest passion, but it's also now my job, my career. So I'm not worried about having to maintain my garden, come out and prune things. I actually really enjoy pruning my fruit trees because it means that I've got more material to feed back to them to then produce more fruit. So that's the way that I like to look at it. I hope that my garden is never finished. I constantly want to be able to come out and do something, and that's why I'm always struggling with running out of room, because I don't want my garden to be finished. I don't want that to be as all the fruit trees that I can have and then move on. I want to always be adding new varieties and trialing out new things and experimenting with new things. So over time, my garden has got more and more high density, and that is probably going to continue as well. Utilising the climate that I have to experiment, to grow, to try all the things, I am producing more than enough fruit on each fruit tree for me, because realistically this garden is for me, so growing what I like to eat. So my high density strategy didn't happen overnight, and it happened naturally, and I've just been adding things to my garden one step at a time, and always just thinking about a few years in the future, what is my backup plans if this gets too big. Also researching the plants, knowing what sort of root structures they have, looking at the wants and needs of the plant and some of the benefits, like the fact that they lose their leaves or they don't lose their leaves, and then also researching the root structure. Excuse me, it's quite loud. Also looking into the different root structures. So if you are going to be planting something next to a driveway or next to a pool, definitely have a look at the types of root structures, because all fruit trees have different types of roots. So feijoas have really shallow feeder roots, like fine hairs. Things like mulberry have very, very intense roots. So those are something that you do not want to plant right next to pavers or anything like that, because they are going to spread their roots really, really far, meters and meters, and they are very hard to dig up. So write a list of all the fruit trees that you want, and then you can go through and maybe research a little bit of those. But check out this video if you want to see some of the fruit trees I would avoid planting in the ground, or at least giving them a lot more space. So I hope this video helps. I hope it's answered a few of your questions. If you have any more, drop them in the comments. I'm always up to answer your questions or make more videos on things that you want to see more of in my garden.